it was effectively an excuse to throw in the towel then. I had the idea there that I still had a few days. I could get that sorted and tour my way back to where the start was. So I think I spent 5 days on the road doing what I thought I wanted to do, but I never really enjoyed it because I always had this element hanging over me that I wasn't there to do this. And that really reinforced this aspect of me to try and separate the two. That when I'm racing, I race. When I tour, I tour.
Welcome to Seek Travel Ride, where we share the stories and experiences of people taking amazing adventures by bike. Whether it's crossing state borders, mountain ranges, countries or continents, we want to share that spirit of adventuring on two wheels with our listeners. Hello listeners, it's Bella Malloy here, host of Seek Travel Ride, and welcome back to another episode. Now, a little while ago, I featured Samuel Thompson just before he set off to take on the Touriste Routier Challenge. It was a full lap around France, 4,750 kilometres, around 50,000 metres of climbing, and he had to pass through 61 control points along the way. Now, before Samuel set off on that ride, we discussed his vision, his prep, what he was most looking forward to, which, fair to say, maybe it was consuming a truckload of French pastries. That would have been high up on his list. Well, anyway, I'm happy to report Samuel went out, did the ride, and he didn't just finish it, he set a new world record. He completed it in 12 days, 15 hours and 5 minutes, becoming the first person to do so in under 13 days. Now, with the benefit of being able to reflect on his achievements, Samuel has been magnanimous enough to offer up his time so that we can chat about his experience fully. And in order to do that properly, it means winding back and getting a picture of Sam, the rider himself. Because you don't just magic your way into a world record, and while it no doubt took months of preparation to set off on this specific challenge, you could argue Sam's actually been building up to this for many years. He made his first start in ultracycling in 2017 at the Transatlantic Way in Ireland, and since then he's taken on events in Norway, the UK and Europe. He's often featuring at the very pointy end of the leaderboard, sometimes in that coveted first place position. Sam's also harnessed all of his own personal experience and now works as a coach where he focuses on helping others chase their ambitions. But you'd be wrong to think Sam's focus is just purely ultracycling. And when he isn't challenging himself in these kind of events, you'll likely find him taking on a petit tour of his own, because he just genuinely enjoys riding his bike. Albeit, he does so doing incredibly long distances pretty much every day. Now, perhaps it's an excuse to feed his almond croissant addiction? We'll get to ask Sam that soon. Regardless, he's also very much against the notion of suffering and detests the idea that you should feel miserable taking on these kinds of roads. So it's time to learn more about Samuel, how he came to take on the Touriste Routier Challenge, and also how many croissants did it actually take to set a new world record? 12 days, 15 hours, 5 minutes. Samuel Thompson, a big warm welcome to the show.
Hi Bella, thank you for having me back on. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's great to see you virtually, having actually seen you in person during your event, Sam. That was an awesome little time we get to spend together here after you'd had the dash up the Perisord, Col de Aspen and the Col de Tourmalet. It was awesome to see you, I guess, in your element face to face.
Yeah, that's right. I think that was one of my favourite parts of the route, actually. Coming on early, it was some of the roads I'm familiar with, having done them in previous events, but they were always different each time. It was the first time I'd been up the Tourmalet during the day, and to meet you at the bottom, I think I called you my Boulange Angel.
Yes, I brought you some pastries, didn't I?
Yeah, so that fueled me for the rest of the morning.
Oh, and it got you up the Soleure and Aubisque afterwards. I can't wait to dig into your adventure, Sam, and I've got a bucket load of questions for you. But the first question I start my show with, Samuel, and I ask it of all my guests, is, Samuel Thompson, do you remember the very first bike you ever rode?
Yes, it was a black mountain bike from Halfords, which people from the UK will know all about Halfords because everyone gets their first bike from Halfords.
So Aussie here, people not from the UK, is Halfords like the bike store that you see in every single city, or what is Halfords?
Yeah, it's one of these big out of town retail type stores. It also sells a lot of car stuff, but everyone has a bike section. They're very reasonably priced, and I think it's just what parents think of when they're buying their child a bike, that you go to Halfords to get that bike.
Okay, so your bike was a Halfords bike, a mountain bike. Did you ride bikes heaps growing up?
I rode a lot as a child, just around the local area, getting up to all sorts of good, not trouble, of course, but not particularly in a sporting sense. When I was that age, it was more seen as a form of transport, a form of getting around the place.
Yeah, and has that stuck with you? Like, do you use your bike to commute to places now? I know you live in France now, and cycle commuting in France is we're pretty well set up for that. But are you a cycle commuter now as well?
Well, as I work from my apartment, generally my commute wouldn't take very long. In terms of how I get around, yeah, it's largely by bike. I haven't owned a car in more than 15 years now. I still have a driving license, so I'm not totally against that form of transport, but I just feel for the lifestyle I built for myself, the things that I do, that the bike facilitates generally my needs in that sense.
I mentioned in my introduction there, Sam, how you've sort of got it's about 8 years now where you've really been in the ultra scene, lining up at events. Prior to that, like, how does someone get into long distance events like this? Like, were you riding for sport? Were you riding for fitness? Were you doing cycle tours that just kept getting longer? Like, how did Samuel Thompson, the ultra cyclist, get birthed?
It's difficult to pick one moment potentially. I bought my first road bike, racing bike, when I was at university. So during school and before, cycling wasn't really seen as a sport for me. I'd got into running at a reasonably competitive club level, and cycling was at that point sort of cross training alongside. But one element which had really attracted to me, even from that side, was that element of travel, that of adventure. I think if I were to cite one inspiration early on, that was reading Mark Beaumont's first Around the World book, where it was quite far from the sort of endeavours we are seeing these days in similar record attempts. I think he averaged around 100 miles a day, which is, he wasn't dawdling, but he was taking rest days. He was essentially making it up as he went along, and just reading as much about the adventure he had going to all these places. The route he took was particularly interesting at that time, going through the Middle East and through East Asia as well. And that was quite inspiring to see how someone could combine that. Obviously, it's an athletic endeavour, but also that element of a voyage, of seeing places and experiencing things while carrying all you need on your bicycle.
It's funny because I sort of reflect back when you're hearing you say that, because it was actually the very first, I guess, bike travel, cycling related book that I ever read as well. Sorry, Mark, I think it was like on sale for like $2 or something at a bookstore, but I saw it and thought, oh wow, that looks interesting. And I certainly, in fact, I'm even wondering if I would classify myself as someone who was even cycling for sport at that time. It was really just piquing my interest of what a bizarre, unique thing to do. I always say on this podcast, Sam, that I feel like I highlight like the 0.1% of the world, because it normalizes these type of things, like what you're doing, people who ride around the world, people who even take a month off to ride somewhere. It's actually not that common. So I can understand you getting inspired by Mark, but did you then go on your own little bike adventure, or was the Transatlantic Way in 2017 the first sort of voyage from, an adventure and a bike sort of journey that you took?
Yeah, it actually took me a little while to get around to doing my first major trip on a bike. I was I was more focused on running at that time and continued that for a number of years afterwards. And it was only really when I started to pick up some injuries from running and I started to use the bike more and more, firstly for sports fitness, and then this idea kept creeping in my mind of using it more to facilitate this travel element. So it was 2014 that I first planned my own overseas independent trip. I was living in London at the time. I cycled down to Portsmouth on the coast and got a ferry to Santander in northern Spain, and then rode through Spain, back up through France to get a ferry back from Le Havre. So that was over about 10 days. Very different, even though it was only just over 10 years ago, the way I approached it was very different to today. I mean, the whole industry in terms of how you can equip yourself and the knowledge that there is out there is developed massively. So I set off with what was essentially a entry-level road bike with panniers, not much else in terms of equipment, so I was very, very rear loaded. I broke a spoke on my way to Portsmouth, managed to get it repaired. Looking back now, I don't know how that bike held together with the amount I was carrying, but I just loved it all, and things have slightly escalated since then.
Got out a little bit out of hand. Did you find you loved it from the first few moments of that trip? Like, obviously you dealt with equipment failures, within the first day, I think you said, but I often find on the very first trip we take, even if we ride bikes for fitness, it's very different proposition to putting panniers on a bike, especially a road bike, and then all of a sudden taking off. And I say especially a road bike because if you've got a road bike, chances are that's what you ride daily. And road bikes are built for speed and being swift and being quick. And as soon as you lump panniers on the back, all of a sudden it's not so swift anymore. So did you find that there was a baptism of fire that took place in the first few days, or were you just leaned right into the adventure and soaking it all up?
I think the latter. Obviously, there was an adjustment to make in terms of how the bike handled, how it felt riding it, but I don't seem to recall it holding me back too much. Probably because I had a different attitude of the way of riding there. It was a case of probably treating it more a sporting aspect than I would do now, but. No, I seem to, in that sense, adjust to it fairly quickly. And I, from my memories of that trip, I seem to enjoy it all, and didn't really feel like. Obviously, there was a lot that developed as the trip went along, but I'd also planned it out quite rigidly. I planned and booked where I was going to stay pretty much every night. So I had a schedule to stick to in that sense. I think the way that I went about that sort of even carries through to how I approach things now. I've always liked to be quite organised, and when I can be in advance, sometimes to my detriment. But I think that served me well in that sense.
Yeah, well, I was just reflecting back on our first conversation about the whole Touriste Routier Challenge, and I remember you saying, there was months of research into this project. It's not like you decided on it and 3 weeks later you're, all right, let's see how we go. There was a lot of research went into it. That very first trip, there's obviously something happened because a few years later you are at the Transatlantic Way start line. That's an ultra event. I'm not sure which distance you were taking on because I think they have 2 distance categories in that event. But regardless, on the Transatlantic Way there, you're almost guaranteed some pretty lumpy hilly terrain and some strong westerly winds, right? So how did you end up to signing up for that and getting into the ultra scene?
Well, the major entry point there was discovering Audax, and I entered my first Audax event because of a friend who was preparing for Paris in that year of 2015, and they had done their 200k already and were about to do a 300k, and I basically joined them for that. And so 300k was my first Audax. I remember finishing late in the night. It was quite a traumatic experience, but made it
well
through.
Done.
And thank you. And it ended up that year I ended up doing a 600k a couple of months later, and was sort of found myself immersed in that world of doing more calendar Audax events, wanted to complete the Super Randonneur series, and obviously from there that was essentially the entry point to this world where you started to hear about the races. It must have been the Transcontinental race I'd heard of first at that time.
It would have been really young in its infancy then too, right? Like the first edition was was it 2013?
I think it was 2013, so it must have been looking at the third, fourth editions at that point.
Wow. I've got to ask, you know how you said you did first Audax of 300, love that, and then you did the 600. Did you end up doing the qualifiers and trying to get into PBP that time as well, or no?
No, I think I was a bit late starting then. I can't remember it being a massive objective of mine at that point. I still haven't done PvP to this date.
It's coming up, a couple of years.
Potentially in 2027. But no, at that point, I think it wasn't my objective for that year.
So, start line of an ultra, and they're very different to an Audax in that, the self-supported method, it's not like you've got places where you can check in, have stuff shipped, there's food from a canteen, there's beds laid out that you can, rent by the hour or whatever in the community hall with all the volunteers. It's very different proposition. What was it like changing the style of events you were now riding from those 200 or 300k Audaxes to all of a sudden now you're on an ultra event? Yeah,
I felt like the transition was essentially fairly natural, because even a lot of the Audax events, especially in the UK, they are what they term as X-rated, which there's nothing saucy about that. It's just that there aren't any facilities available for once you started and finished. Basically, the controls, there are controls along the way, but it's either get a receipt from a cash point or proof of passage on your own. So they aren't as facilitated as some others. So it felt natural in that sense. I'd also obviously be doing a lot more riding in preparation where it was independently arranged. So that style of riding I was used to doing overnighters, doing some point-to-point rides, and I'd also done a few more independent tours in that intervening period. So I was quite used to those individual elements. Maybe what I was less prepared for was that try and string it together over a week, that sort of unknown of riding those sort of distances day after day and managing myself, my sleep, all of these things in a single event, because it was 2,500 kilometers. There was only one distance at that time. We had very challenging weather conditions as well in that year, as is typical in Ireland at the start of June. I was even blown off my bike once by a gust of wind.
Listeners, I want to talk about sunglasses, and I want to give a huge shout out to Ombres. Specifically, I've been rocking the Refugio Sunnies, and these things have honestly been a revelation for me. Now, I don't know about you, but I have had the heartbreak of breaking much loved sunglasses before. My favourite pair snapped, and seriously, I tried everything to fix them. I even had a friend try and reintegrate the arm for me. I tried to go back to the original supplier, and it was a discontinued model, and I had absolutely no luck. Anyway, I have recently switched to Ombres, and here's the clever part. They actually don't have sidearms. Instead, they use this lightweight cord system which sits comfortably around your head, and they stay perfectly in place. Seriously, they do not slip, they do not roll down your nose when you're riding and your nose is sweaty or you're heading down a descent. You don't have to continually move them around and shift them. And the other thing is they have no arms to break in the first place, and they don't get tangled in your hair. That was an unexpected great thing, and trust me, if you've seen a photo of me, you know that I've got some pretty wild curly locks, and not having sunglasses get tangled in there is a great thing as well. But here's the real kicker. For every pair that they make, Ombres plant 20 mangrove trees. So they're producing stuff which is brilliant for your bike adventures while at the same time being absolutely awesome for our planet as well. If you want to check them out and support the podcast, head to the affiliate link, which I have put in the show notes. Honestly, once you try Ombras, you're not going to go back to your conventional sunnies. I every now and then semi-think about an ultra again, and the one I would do if I was doing it, I've always said would be Transatlantic Way, but then I sort of think, yeah, I don't know. I hear people tell the stories like you do and think, maybe I'd just like to do that as a bike tour.
I think one thing that's really struck out from that, which has since become a recurring theme, and there's always been there in terms of travelling by bike, is how kind, generous and welcoming the locals were. In Ireland, it was just on a different level. If people show interest in what you're doing, if you ask something for someone, they will go above and beyond. There's so many of these amazing encounters that it's such a friendly place. And like I say, it's not just Ireland, but in Ireland it was particularly evident.
I remember interviewing Saoirse Potty. Hi, Saoirse. And she had gone to Ireland to get some more experience sort of wild camping on her own. And she said that she realised very quickly that if she wanted to, she could probably never ever pitch her tent, because the first night she stayed with friends who then linked her up with friends of friends and friends of friends. And as her route kept going on, she always had somewhere where she was offered to stay. Yeah. That's sort of the Irish hospitality there in spades. I wanted to take you to the event because I've got a quote from you where you say that the Transatlantic Way was certainly a baptism of fire, wind and rain. I made almost all of the common rookie errors, but I was gripped by the thrill of the race and I learnt so much from the experience. After the first couple of days, my body was beginning to fall apart, and I also spent far too long obsessing over the tracker and my race position. I now rarely even check a tracker during a race. I prioritise focus on my own performances, as this is the only thing that I have control over. I want to take you back to that. The baptism of fire can sort of understand, we were talking about the weather and then having to manage all of those variables yourself. I can understand that. The element of all of a sudden having a tracker where you can not just see your progress but everyone else's around you progress, that was obviously something that took your focus during the event as well?
Yeah, I think far too much so in that case. That it was quite a thrill to be in that competitive element and see where you were placed against others. But when it got to the point I was tracking it so often, and this is what the concern I have about doing this now or advising others to do this, is how it then affects your own strategy. That these things, they are essentially long individual time trials, and that element of pacing, however we're looking at that should be similar whether you're doing a 10-mile time trial or a 1,000-mile time trial. That at any point, there's that great Chris Boardman quote, that at any point you should be asking yourself, can I continue at this pace, basically? If the answer is no, then you're going too fast. If the answer is yes, you're not going fast enough. But if the answer is maybe, then that's just about right. So I think a similar concept can be applied here, that it shouldn't really matter what other people are doing around you, that you do your best and the outcome will take care of itself. It really depends on how, as a person, you react to what other people are doing around you. I think if it's a case of just giving yourself information, potentially you could use that as motivation. If you feel like you're potentially slacking off, to remind yourself that you are in a race, that could be a positive thing. But then if you see if what other people are doing is going to affect your strategy, especially when it comes to sleep patterns, if you think I need to cut down on sleep or push too hard, then I think it's often just going to come back and bite.
Like with the Transatlantic Way, did you find that since then, because you've done a number of ultras since then, have you had the discipline to not really focus on the tracker, or do you find that you do have to constantly remind yourself, don't focus on that, Samuel, focus on yourself, what are you doing? And now that's become just inherent in how you do things now.
Yeah, I think it's become natural now. I haven't even really felt the need to check the tracker during the race. I've recently been considering whether potentially there's certain points in the race where it could help potentially towards the end. But I've done the first event where I didn't look at a tracker at all was the Trans-Pyrenees race in 2019. And I had an idea of where I was because there was a couple of controls where I knew where I'd come into those controls. So at halfway, I knew I was second going into that control, and I'd seen the person I sort of crossed paths with him on an out and back. And so I spent the second half of the race sort of wondering where I was, and in a way sort of telling myself potentially I'm leading here, and that was a real motivation boost to me. Maybe if I knew that other people were out of reach, or if I knew for certain I was ahead, then maybe it would have impacted me negatively. So I didn't want to check the tracker in that sense. The person who ended up winning overtook me on the road with about 100 kilometers to go, and I didn't know whether it was first or second, but I knew that he was moving a lot faster than I was at that point, and so I just did what I can do. So in that sense, reflecting on it, I don't think looking at the tracker would have changed anything to me. I felt like I had done the best I could in terms of my strategy for the race, the way I rode. If I knew like someone finished half an hour before me, and I just can't look back and say I should have done this differently because something else may have come up. So that's the way I look at these things. Especially, I don't like to look back after an event and think, oh, if only I'd found an hour here, an hour there, because everyone else is saying that. So if we all find an hour, we're all just going to be in the same position but moved up an hour quicker. And if this thing didn't happen, something else could have happened. So it's more of a case of managing what happens rather than looking back and saying all these what ifs.
Yeah, something that comes to my mind when there's things like a tracker where you can see where you are, and in an ultra where you can see where your competitors are, especially if you're attacking it like a race. I've often wondered with the mental mindset of, is it harder if you're the one being chased or if you're the one doing the chasing as well? Like, have you found yourself on both sides of that coin then?
Yeah, but I think it's also important to remember, especially when these things play out over such long periods, that those differences can be artificial in terms of sleep patterns. If people have got slightly different sleep patterns, then where you're at one point doesn't make a huge difference. When I look back on, especially over the past few years, the strategy I've often taken in longer events and that I did on this lap of France, is sleep early, start early. So that means if you look at a tracker for most races at 10 p.m, I've probably been sleeping for the last 2 hours, so there's going to be quite a lot of people ahead of me. But come 2 a.m. in the morning, I'll have been moving for a couple of hours, they will still be in bed, so that position's changed. So it depends when you look at the tracker, and it's something, unless you've been tracking everyone's movements, everyone's patterns, that instant in the moment snapshot isn't always the best reflection. And then that's before we come into how sustainable people, especially people's sleep patterns, are. If some people are really pushing it, potentially they've skipped a night of sleep to get to this certain position, that's not going to be sustainable. So again, not getting carried away with other people's actions when it's just trusting your own strategy and seeing where that places you at the end. I think that's often going to be the best reflection of overall performances.
Yeah, it's interesting as well, just, you know how we were talking about the evolution of these type of long distance things, even you know, when we talk about Mark Beaumont and how he set the world record initially, and then how the records have been set ever since, and how there's been such a big change, and changes in equipment, like how you could carry equipment on your bike, 10 years ago to how you can carry it now is so different. I feel with each ultra, the sleep strategy, that thing is changing as well. And I wonder if it's changing in the other direction. And what I mean there is I know there's people that are lining up at events having as little sleep as possible to ride as far as possible each and every day on the minimum amount of sleep that they can still sustain. But I also think, and maybe I'm not sure that there's anything other than just a few people that I've noticed, I feel though, Samuel, that people are looking at sleep in a different way, and sleep patterns and sleep cycles and how long is a sleep cycle, and when do I want to be waking up from a sleep cycle in terms of how I go with things. I think Transcontinental's just finished up, and I remember reading a few quotes from Lael Wilcox, and she was saying how it's been one of the races where she's physically felt really good, and she thinks it's because of the extra sleep that she's allowed herself to have.
Yeah, and even the winner of that race, Victor Pisoni, when you're looking at his percentage stop time, he's at 70% moving, 30% stopped, which I don't think I've ever seen for transcontinental races. Usually more than 80% for the winner. And you'll see as well that his average moving speed was the highest of all, which often is the case for the winner. But I think what we're seeing now in part is that the general standard moving up. So it's not enough just to be able to cut down your stop time, which obviously includes sleep time, as far as possible, and just hope that just by moving more at slow speed is going to get you there. I think that standard has risen so much that you have to be fast and to be able to facilitate that to sleep well, which I think is a healthy thing for this sport, that to see it as a who can sleep less competition, it's not a healthy thing to be promoting. And especially being a fairly, I know ultra distance events have been around for a long time, but in this sense, we don't know long-term consequences of doing that, and there have been some research studies which have particularly focused on ultra distance cycling that have outlined that point, that there are potential consequences, not just physical but long-term mental health. And it's something where potentially a couple of events where I potentially haven't gotten enough sleep during them, that it's not just the physical recovery afterwards, it's that mental recovery too. So I find when I have managed that better, and I find with experience I have done that better, and it's something I try to promote and transmit to other people, that your overall experience is so much better. You'll feel better physically, and I truly believe that performance then follows. That obviously there has to be an efficiency element, that we can't sleep 8 hours a day. We can take on these events however you wish, but if we're looking at wanting to optimize overall performance in a healthy way, you can't really get away with sleeping 8 hours a night and hope to ride as fast as you can in between and make up the gap. There has to be some give and take there, but finding that healthy equilibrium, I think, is really important, and it's really promising to see that those who are taking that approach are being rewarded in some of the more competitive events now.
And there's events now which have minimum time that you can take, or there has to be a set amount of time elapsed before you can actually reach a checkpoint, which is sort of looking at making sure that people are actually stopping and taking time and are hopefully resting. Well, resting, whether they're sleeping when they're stopped, I don't know, but I can't imagine it takes much effort to fall asleep when you've been riding for 22 hours. Although I guess you could go the other way. You could go the other way and be completely wired. Something I wanted to know was, you know, when I look at the events that you've done, your track record's pretty amazing. You've got some fairly high places there. You've taken some first places. You've done some fastest known times before as well. Have you always been motivated to race these events? Because I feel like there's two types of people that turn up to the start lines. There's people who are doing it for the challenge of themselves to see whether they can get there, and then there's people who, you know, they still have that element there because it's all an unknown in an ultra, but also know that with their capabilities they could actually push for, you know, a podium or a first place or something like that on GC.
Mm-hmm. I think when I enter events like this, of course I want to complete the route. I think that has always got to be the first objective. I mean, it's not an all or bust thing for me. I want to do the event and enjoy it, and I think being well prepared puts you in the best position to enjoy it as you're going along. But equally, entering events, particularly ones which are termed as races, I want to treat them as a race, and there is a competitive aspect there, and it's something which I try to balance with what I do. So I like to make time and have this counter aspect with the more touring side, the riding on my own terms for enjoyment. I can choose the route, I can choose how I take it as I go along. So then when I do enter a race, which, I mean, we're not talking about numerous times a year. I'm generally doing events of this nature 2 or 3 times a year. So I find if I have that balance, it means when I enter what is termed a race, I can treat it as a race and commit to it in that sense, because I'm not feel like I'm missing out on, I don't want to say the more pleasant side, because I think that's another thing, that there's rewards for both sides, and I think there's a really rewarding aspect for being competitive and treating yourself and pushing yourself in that way. But there was a stage where I felt like I was doing too much on that and missing out on the other side of being able to have the afternoon off, still riding decent distances, but not feeling that pressure to always be moving. So I think including both of those in what I do helps me to get the best out of either side.
You say that now, reflecting back. At that time, did you realise that you were stuck in that I've got to do more cycle? I
think so, and potentially having some success feeds into that as well. And potentially I was caught up a bit too much on the competitive side and losing sight of why I wanted to do these events in the first place, which was combining both that venture side with the competitive aspect. And the timing probably didn't help, because I think we were, in particular, I'm talking just after the COVID period, where I had a couple of years where, I did a couple of trips around the UK where I was living at that time, but I couldn't travel further afield. So I felt like that balance wasn't quite right there.
I mean, you can see that the COVID period's pretty stark on your race calendar or in your event calendar, because we start in 2017, you build up, you have a few events at 2019, and then bang, there's nothing, I think, until 2022, which was COVID. And then you did, like we mentioned, 2019 Trans-Pyrenees, you came second, so you lined up in 2022 when it reinstated and could run again. That one ended up with you scratching, and I feel, reflecting back on what you've done and your approach to events, that scratch was sort of a bit of a pivotal learning point for you as well.
Yeah, massively. And in retrospect, I think it was a good thing to go through. That potentially there was many things I could have done, especially to be in a better mindset for that event. But it really made me reflect on why I was in that position, and I was really determined to use it as something to learn from. It made me really concentrate on, I ended up reading a lot about how people turned failure into success, and it's made me sort of term it, it's not really a failure. I could use it for a positive sense, and I feel like that has really benefited me since, and especially how my mindset going into these events. One, I remember being quite sort of intimidated going into that event by the unknown aspects, by not knowing where you're going to end up that day, how you're going to figure out where you're going to sleep, what you're going to do if things potentially go wrong. It probably wasn't helped. I think there was a bit of pathetic fallacy going on at the start of that event, because it was rotten weather starting at Biarritz. It's
very Shakespearean to begin with.
Yeah, it was something about record rainfall in a few days before, so I think that just had me a bit anxious as well, and that played out in my mindset during the event. I was putting pressure on myself in terms of the performance aspect, and I never really allowed myself to enjoy it. And then, ironically, as soon as I felt like things had turned a corner, and then I found myself with blowing off my rear tyre on an off-road section in the middle of the mountains, just on off-road bit near Arandura, which it ultimately was the straw which
broke the camel's back.
It was the straw which broke the camel's back. It was effectively an excuse to throw in the towel then. And I had the idea there that I still had a few days. I could get that sorted and tour my way back to where the start was. So I spent 5 days on the road doing what I thought I wanted to do, but I never really enjoyed it because I always had this element hanging over me that this wasn't why I wasn't there to do this. And I was sort of trying to use another nice term, trying to polish a turd. And it just made me that really reinforced this aspect of me to try and separate the two. Like when I'm racing, I race. When I tour, I tour.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that. I know I've only ever done one ultra before, Sam, and it was itty bitty compared to what you've done. But I do remember distinctly at one point wishing equipment failure on myself just so that I could have an excuse to not continue. So I feel like I've been in that mindset before where I know that physically I probably could go on, but wouldn't it be great if there was a reason why I couldn't, and then I could just get out of here? and I don't know, like I've analysed that myself. I mean, nothing did happen. I did continue. I finished and everything went fine. My saddle sores would probably argue the other way, but all jokes aside, I do wonder whether sometimes are we looking at for that excuse for ourselves as an excuse, or is it the excuse that we want to hold up if we scratch because of the perception of what other people will have thought if we scratched? And I often wonder, because there's such a mental load on this, and I think when you're in an event you can't see it because all the people who are cheering you on and are near and dear to you are only wishing you well and are already proud of you for doing what you're doing in the first place. No one's going to be going, gee, Sam, you should have bucked up there and kept going. Well, that's an assumption. I don't think your friends and family would be thinking that. But when you're in the race, that's possibly what you're thinking. Oh, what's such and such going to be thinking of? You know, so if you've got something that's like an equipment failure, well, that was out of my hands, so I had to scratch. Like, do you see where I'm coming from with that?
Yeah, and it also raises the point of what truly is within our control in these events, and it makes me think of this element of luck. And I'm trying to think of a good way of wording it. That I think we can put luck on our sides a lot of this, especially when you're talking about equipment and so on. That it shouldn't be. I mean, some things may happen which you couldn't have predicted that aren't in your control. But I think a lot in your preparation, whether that's choosing the right equipment, maintaining it, making sure it's in the best condition as possible beforehand, can put luck on your side in this case. So I do think we should be careful when we sort of say this thing happened, it was a mechanical, so it wasn't me. I think this all rolls into part of the challenge, that it's physical, but it's also you're riding a bike, which needs to help you facilitate that as well.
Yeah, and it's sort of like, what equipment do I put with it? And if I have to take an off-road parkour, what tyre width am I choosing? What wheels am I choosing? And what am I prioritising? Is it the 900 kilometres on asphalt or the 25 kilometres on, crappy rocky gravel or stuff like that as well? The other element that came across there, and it's an ethos of yours which you've taken towards, I think, every event, and especially in the Touriste Routier, was this idea of preparation over planning, and to prepare properly but not to be too rigid in your planning. And I remember when you were talking about Touriste Routier, in the after, looking back and reflecting on it, you were like, did I have a plan? The distinction I would make: plans go out the window on the first day if they're too rigid. I was prepared, not planned rigidly. Can you sort of go into that a little bit deeper and what you mean by being prepared over setting plans?
Yeah, in terms of planning in this context, I would sort of define that as saying, I'm going to ride 400 kilometres a day. Or even maybe you could be a bit more nuanced about that and say I'm going to ride 350 kilometers a day on a flat, but in the mountainous parts 300 kilometers. And the problem with plans of this sense is, firstly, how much control you have over them, especially when we're defining them by things like distance. That the wind's blowing the wrong way, you could be exceeding that, or you could be behind on that. And I think you're putting your success down to something which isn't totally in your control. And my concern that is not just if you are behind schedule, but if you're ahead of schedule as well. If you've got things carefully planned out over a number of days, it just throws it out in that sense. In that way, I believe preparation is a better term. I think what I like to do is give myself all the information, prepare all the information in advance so that when I'm on the road at any given point, I can make the right decision and not have to go searching for that information. That comes down to finding out or equipping myself with knowledge of what is ahead on my route in terms of resupply, what the major challenges are, mountain passes and so on. And having ways of, this particular app which I've been using, having things like waymarks on your routing platform and so on, just so that it takes away a lot of the thinking when you're on the move, potentially in a stressful situation, which is usually when you have to resort to this sort of information.
And is that a learnt thing because you've had to do the thinking and the stressful stuff, where had you prepared a lot more prior or research, then that would be something that you wouldn't have to concern yourself with?
I think it's something which seemed to come naturally to me. I remember even in Transatlantic Way making route notes of at certain kilometre, these are the towns, these are what you can get there. And as things have developed, I've been more thorough of that. It's essentially just making sure that I'm not going to get caught out, not being able to resupply, not being able to find somewhere to sleep. And adding as much detail, I always think the more of this research you can do in advance, the less you have to do on the go. I even found going around France that a lot of the time I didn't have to refer to this because I'd been over it quite a few times. I had a good idea what was coming up next. So it also ingrains in you what you are going to expect on your own. I think I remember even there were certain towns I sort of knew what side of the town the supermarket was at. So
wow, you really did thoroughly prepare. And actually, let's talk about your lap around France, as you've sort of called it, the Touriste Routier Challenge. Listeners, I did a full mini midweek episode with Samuel talking specifically about this challenge before he went out and set it out. But for the benefit of those people who haven't heard that, tell everyone about Touriste Routier, what it is, and how all of a sudden you became, can I say, obsessed with doing it.
Oh, it's quite a long story. So it's effectively the Tour de France Randonneur, which is I would describe it as a permanent Audax randonnée event, which is run by a Parisian cycle club since 1958. Anyone can register to take part, and they can choose to start any time of the year where the mountain passes are accessible, so usually between sort of June and September time.
September, yeah.
I don't think it is available to open during the winter, but yeah, you wouldn't go over those climbs during then anyway. You can there are 61 control points which you must pass through and gain proof of passage by basically a stamp in a brevet card type object. And you can start and finish anywhere on the route, which handily, where I live, the town of Manosque in south of France, is a control point on the route. So the choice was simple for me to start and finish there. You can also take it in clockwise or anti-clockwise, either direction. And apart from that, the rules are fairly relaxed. Although generally Audax's randonnées are seen as self-supported individual challenges, this one does stress that it should be seen as an individual effort, but the rules do allow for support in some senses. The only thing which isn't allowed in that way is having a following car on the road at all times. But if you wanted to, you could have a caravan meet you at certain points, or you can sleep in it during the night. So it's up to the person themselves how they want to treat this. I get the impression most people do take it on as self-sufficient in a broad sense, and see it as that personal individual challenge. I think it attracts that type of person.
I have to say, since I first learnt about it, I've been tempted by it. Not to set a record by any measure. I would very much do it in the touring style. But it has made me sort of think, oh, wow, that'd actually be quite a way to see a lot of, like you said, it's that true lap of France as well. where did you discover it, and how long were you prepping before you decided that's it? I think, was it June? What date in June did you take off? Was
the
it
15th of
15th?
June.
Yeah. So how, and that was, for anyone listening in the far future, Samuel did this from June 15, 2025. So how did you decide, like, period of time passed from, oh, wow, this is interesting, to June 15, 2025?
I believe it may have been a number of years ago that I came across that this thing existed, but I hadn't looked into it too much. I was vaguely aware that Christophe Allaguer, who had previously held the fastest time, he is a 2-time winner of the transcontinental race, so he's quite well known in this scene. I was aware that he had set this record, but it was 2 years ago that I distinctly remember this taking a grip on me. Let's say it was around the time where I was firmly set on this intention to move to France at the time. I had a real love of the country, and
not just its pastries.
Oh well, that's all forms part of it. There are rumours that I just moved here for access to good viennoiserie, but I will not confirm or deny that.
You wouldn't
rumour.
be the only one.
So it was around this time which it was the route in itself that's the challenge, and part of it comes back to what I was saying about being inspired by Mark Beaumont and the other people who've done around the world and similar records of that nature. That idea of, I mean, races have one pool being competitive against others in a particular moment of time, but being able to do something where you are the fastest that's ever done that's always really attracted me. Obviously, riding around the world is quite a difficult logistical thing to do, so I was always sort of on the lookout for what could be sort of my equivalent to that in given sort of where I'm at in my, say, sporting journey in that sense, and what is logistically feasible in that sense. So this really gripped me in that way, that it was something which, in a way, I know it's a big thing in Lap of France, but to be able to get my head around, and also where that fastest time was of course nowhere easy, but it was something which I had done those sort of distances over a week, 10 days. So it was a stretch, but it was a possible next step. So I think a number of these factors all came together to make me sort of seriously think about this. In terms of the timing, I had thought about June or September seemed like the best times to avoid when the major holiday seasons are, for a number of reasons, which I think worked out well for me doing it in June, especially finding accommodation. You would think that the weather would be not quite as hot, but maybe we'll come on to that wasn't quite the case.
The never-ending heat wave.
Yeah. And yeah, it was being my first year after moving to France in 2024. The timing wasn't going to be great. So towards the end of last year, towards the end of 2024, once I'd finished the event I was doing in August, I sort of set out this firm intention that this was going to be my big project for 2025, and started the long process of putting things into place for that to happen in June in 2025.
Leading up to it, were there ever any moments or doubts of whether you could take to the start line? Like, did you have any injury setbacks or mental doubts or anything like that? Or was it just all in, full focused, and again, prior preparation prevents piss poor performance. I always think of that. But was it down to all your preparation that led you being able to take to the start line? Or were there doubts? Listeners, I want to give a huge shout out to Zerali, who are supporting Seek Travel Ride. I'm honestly stoked to be working with them because they are an Aussie company doing outdoor gear right. Everything they make is designed by people who actually spend time adventuring outdoors, so they get what works and what doesn't. What I really love is how environmentally conscious they are as a company. They are designing products thinking about their environmental impact. They're using both sustainable and ethical materials to create gear that will last. I absolutely love their line of merino products. They're brilliant, lightweight, breathable, You wear it for days, you don't get smelly, and trust me, when you're out on the road or a trail for a few days at a time on a bike adventure, not feeling like you're smelly wearing the same t-shirt is a big plus. They don't just make clothing though, they also have tents, they have sleep mats, they make trail shoes, hats, everything. So if you are in the market for some of that outdoor type equipment, please hit up the affiliate link in the show notes. And another big monumental thank you to Zurali for supporting the show. Now, let's get back to the episode.
I wouldn't say there were any huge doubts. I felt like it was a natural process along the way. Yeah, then it was a long road. I kept saying along the way that the riding would be the easy bit after all that went into it beforehand. And in relative terms, let's say it was far from easy. There was one time, I distinctly remember one morning when I was out, and I thought to myself, like, it's quite a big thing to prepare for, as much from the logistics side of what I wanted to make it. I thought, should I not just enter the transcontinental race instead? That's a similar distance. I haven't done it. I always think one day I'd like to do it. But then I was thinking, it's in a way it's going to be a similar sort of duration to do the event. Then I would have to get to one end of Europe and get back from the other. So if I'm starting and finishing from where I live, it's probably going to take less time out of my day-to-day life to do this. So in that sense, I think once I got my head around that, then there was nothing else which, in terms of major doubts. Saying that, when I really, and even now sitting down afterwards, when I think about what that entailed doing distance-wise, the average of the previous record was around 370 kilometers a day. And I think sort of around February time, where it was a long time since I'd done that amount in one day, thinking about the time that takes, and then doing that the day after and after, just thinking of it like that, it's still now, it seems like quite a daunting thing to do. So again, it's one of these things that you just got to, as I say, trust the process, that I would be building up to it. On the day, I would have things in place so that became natural to me. And it's a different case once you get into it than sitting down before or after trying to sort of get your head around those pure numbers.
You know how there's 61 control points? When you see them on a map of France, on the hexagon there, does the route nearly make itself, or were there long stretches where there's multiple road choices you could choose, and, you know, there's a lot, like, in terms of route planning? And what I want to get to here is there's some ultras where the route is set, you don't have to think about a thing, right? You plug it in and you follow the course. There's some ultras where there are checkpoints, like I guess you've got 61 in this one, or, you know, the Transcon had so many control points and parcours but how you connect them up is totally your prerogative. Mm-hmm. How did it match with the Touriste Routière?
So the organisers do give what they call a parcours type, which is I would potentially term it a sort of recommended route. Similar with a lot of Audax or Randonnée brevet events, that it's not mandatory, and it often avoids the busy roads, which I would naturally try and avoid anyway.
Gosh, yeah, you don't want to be on them anyway.
But
I hate them. They're horrendous.
But there were some sections where it was potentially not busy roads, but other roads where potentially I'll call them the tourist route, not the tourist route, yeah, but the touristic route, where there were more direct options, which we're not talking about going on dual carriageway instead here, but maybe a slightly less scenic route in places. I started off using the parcours type and tried to make modifications which were trying to optimize the route for both my preferences and trying to see if I could cut off any of that distance and elevation, because that's what it came down to. I think their route was about 50 kilometers more, and there was definitely one section where it took in a couple of gratuitous cols in the Pyrenees, which the parcours type goes over the I've forgotten the name of it.
I can name a few for you if you'd like.
Before the Col de Monte from the east.
The Col de Portet d'Aspet?
Yeah, the Col de Portet d'Aspet. It goes over that, and I think it didn't go over the Monte, but effectively I managed to cut off a 1,000-meter climb for an extra 10 to 20 kilometers, which I thought was a good trade-off.
Yeah, especially the Monte is a leg breaker as well. Like, it's not an insignificant 10-kilometer climb either.
And I'd already ridden the Portet d'Aspet twice, so didn't feel like I was missing out anything there. But I felt like in this sense, I was also conscious that in terms of planning the route, that what may look the quickest route on paper isn't always the quickest. I found this to my detriment afterwards. I realised why the organisers had sort of routed around a couple of roads. I think people who've ridden in France may know sort of the roller coaster roads that I'm talking about, where it's dead straight for 10 kilometres and goes like slightly uphill, slightly downhill. You can sort of see the next ridge ahead and think that's the last one, but it keeps going, and it just...
Yeah.
Especially when you're fatigued, it just saps your momentum. Because when you're fresh, you can sort of carry momentum down on the descents and carry it up the uphill. But when you're fatigued,
you're freewheeling on the downhill. You don't care about carrying momentum. You're just caring about not pedaling now.
And then you're shifting up through the gears and the way back up. So yeah, in that case, maybe there wasn't much in terms of how long it would take, but it's just quite mentally sapping being on those roads. Yeah, even if it may be a slight extra distance and elevation taking the quieter roads, that it keeps your interest and it's a more engaging experience.
Now, I had the pleasure, Sam, of being part of your, I guess, race update commentary team, which meant I was in your awesome little WhatsApp group getting your lovely voice messages at the end of every day. And it was amazing how long some of those messages would become listeners. Like, what started out as, 7 or 8 minutes, I think as the Therese Routier project got on, I think we were hitting like 27-minute updates by the end of it. Which I think was key to being tired and so taking longer to think about what you wanted to say, but also potentially being separated from people to speak to for such a long period of time that you've got quite a lot to update people on. But something that you had said sort of, I think it was maybe even 3 or 4 days in, was this idea of not wishing the time away, like not setting out early in the morning thinking, gosh, I can't wait till this day's done, because what was the point of doing it? And it sort of goes back to that ethos that you have of melding this whole idea of a competitive aspect and pushing yourself and seeing how far you can go with that idea of enjoying the journey and enjoying the ride and having a bit of the touriste element of it all attached to it as well. Did you find that you were successful in being able to do that, in being able to enjoy yourself a lot during the ride too?
I'm cautious here that it's all easy to sit here afterwards and say that I loved every moment of it, because when you're out there for so long, even though there weren't any huge ups and downs, in fact I can't really think of any massively down moments, that I did feel like the way that I rode it, the approach that I had helped me to enjoy a lot of it in the moment. And like you said there, it's a case of, I came to the realization that if I'm wishing away the time, sometimes if you're just doing a day ride, you're going home afterwards, you can put your feet up and relax. I knew basically at the end of each day, I was going to go to sleep and get up 4 or slightly more hours later and start doing it again. In that sense, it wasn't like this great thing afterwards to be looking forward to. And to remind myself, another cliche, it's about the journey. It's when I look back afterwards, I'm not going to remember the moment I finish, whether that's the moment each day or the moment at the end. It's going to be those moments or those experiences along the route which I go through, which are going to be the things which stick in my mind. really something which has really helped me to, in the moments, to think about this is what I sort of like to term reverse anxiety. That we're really good at being anxious about things which essentially are things which may happen in the future but haven't happened yet, but we are bringing all that discomfort, those negative emotional feelings into the present moment, to something which may or may not happen. But we don't do the opposite with good things. We think of it as type 2 fun, and I will suffer through this moment and have some fun later. This is going back to what I don't like about this whole suffering term, that if we know we're gonna enjoy it later, why not try and take some of that sort of reverse anxiety and experience it in the moment and take some enjoyment from it. It's another thing which is, it could be seen as a concept which, yeah, it's all good saying that, not being in that moment. But I think if you really are present and you can keep this in mind, then it can make your overall experience that much better.
Yeah, well, I guess someone could hear you say that now and say, oh, yes, Samuel, but you're saying that with the benefit of hindsight, sat in a comfy chair. But what I want to do, because listeners, I have all these voice messages and I have got one lined up. So I want to play it for you, Sam. It really goes into a lot of what you were saying there. And this, I believe, was on, I think it might have been the second last day.
So it's going to be hard not to calculate down, but I think I'm in the headspace now. I know what I do is just what I do all day, and that's what's been so pleasing about this. That I just found enjoyment out of that, which I've never sort of pushed away the time. And because I know it's futile, I'm just doing the same again the next day. And you try to sort of take some enjoyment of it, then why the word gratitude going through my mind a lot today, like how grateful I should be when we have the opportunities to do these things.
Yeah, so the word you were using there was gratitude, and that came in a point where I think you said there was about 50 kilometres to go, and, you know, why wish the time away, be in the moment. I've chosen to do this is the other element of it. And I think it also, to me, it comes down to there's a big side of when people look at ultra events and that whole glorification of type 2 fun and suffering and gritting and getting through. I'm not saying that people don't do that, and power to everyone, but you're very much of the other side of, that's not why you sign up for these. You don't sign up for these to glorify the idea that you had type 2 fun and you gritted and you got through it. Like, you actually did enjoy yourself and you were grateful, and you're the person that's choosing to do this, and what an absolute privilege it is that you're able to do this, right?
Yeah, and that word's gratitude. It's a shame I can't remember who it was, who I specifically remember saying this beforehand, but it was just that word was so simple going through my mind, that it's a privilege that we get to enjoy doing these things. So to sort of frame it as we're suffering through, we're not having a good time, I think it's not being grateful for these opportunities we have. Yeah, the places we get to go. That day in particular, I'd done the 4 big passes in the Alps, the Col de la Madeleine, the Telegraph Galibier double I count as one, the Izoard, and that was at the end of the Col de Var, at the end of that day. And I just remember being on such a high, and partly because I knew after that bit I just had to descend down to where I was staying for the night. But it was also at that stage where I could visualize where the finish was, and I felt like I'd got into that sustainable rhythm even at that stage so far in. As I said in that clip, that became what I did each day. And yeah, why wish the time away when this was what I was looking forward to doing for so long, and there I was in the middle of it. Another example is this, which, coming back to sort of the tracker thing and knowing where we are, even I wasn't, and the planning point as well, I wasn't keeping a track on this is how many kilometres a day I've done, sort of counting down from that sense. My focus was generally on keeping my moving time as high as possible sort of working backwards from I need to be sleeping at least 4 hours each night, trying to cut down how much time I was stopping during the day. So trying to get around sort of this 15, 16 hours moving time during the day. Yeah, so that was my focus in that respect. So I wasn't sort of knowing like I'm exactly at halfway, I need to do this many kilometers on average to finish within 13 days. And my mum had sent me a message. I remember reading it when I was at Cherbourg, which I think it must have been just after halfway. And she said, oh, just over halfway, well done. And she knows that I don't like being told anything about positions and so on. So I jokingly said back to her, you shouldn't have told me that, Mum, because I didn't know. I think a few other people messaged me anyway saying about halfway. So I did know. But I generally said that means there's less than half the fun to go. And so even in that stage, I was aware that I was settled into it. It felt like it was a sustainable effort, which I think is important. When you're out there for the best part of 2 weeks, you just, both for your physical, mental well-being, you can't be suffering the whole way around because you're not going to get the best performance out of it. And I think that enjoyment side plays into the performance. I say this whenever I talk about this, so some people probably heard me say this before, but you never hear the people who are successful, who are winning races, breaking records. They don't say, oh, that was a great performance, but I really hated every moment. It was I suffered my way around. They always look back and say, well, it's probably some element of having rose-tinted glasses afterwards. But I truly believe that if it was otherwise, then people would say this more. But yeah, it's that enjoyment side plays into good performance. If you enjoy what you're doing, you're motivated to keep doing it, and you're going to be in a better place mentally. So yeah, come back to it. It's enjoyment has that positive consequences.
Were there parts of the course where the enjoyment was super high? And what I mean by that was, just as we are, whenever we're setting ourselves a goal on something, and when, especially for yourself, Samuel, when you've intrinsically looked at a route and looked at the waypoints and studied the roads, like you joked, you knew what side of the road a supermarket would be on in a town. There's obviously then milestones, maybe mental milestones of things to get over there. You mentioned there the day where you had 4 or 5 coals in a day. I know the day that I met you had done Perisord, Aspen, Tourmalet. Blew my mind because I saw you at the bottom of the descent of the Tourmalet. I think it was like 10:05 in the morning. Because my original plan, listeners, was I was going to meet you at the summit, and thank God. And the reason I didn't was because, well, you were happy to get up at like, I don't know, ridiculous o'clock. I wasn't. So I could only make it to the bottom. And then, you went on and did Salor and Aubisque that day. And the Alps, you had big days, and they were the really lumpy areas of the course, admittedly. Mm-hmm. But were they the ones you were looking forward to the most, or there were sections nostalgic sections that you knew mentally would lift you up as well? That they might not be the epic summit mountain views, but nostalgia of maybe I rode through here in 2014 when I was riding back up to Le Havre.
Precisely. So yeah, naturally I'm drawn to the mountains. That's my terrain. That's probably the easiest side of it. And I think the days in the mountains, from a mental perspective, they're in some ways easier to cope with. You go up a mountain, you've got the intermediate targets to aim for. That's all you have to think about for a couple of hours. And so it takes care of itself. It's this route, potentially the more difficult bits were going up the west, where it's
or the nothingness.
The
The
Londe. Yeah, that was. Yeah, I think I was fortunate. I did that. Well, I don't think I was fortunate. I did it at night. I don't think there was much else to see. No disrespect to people who live in the Londe, but I don't think there was much else to see if I'd done that in daylight either. All places to stop, to be honest. There wasn't much I went through. And I did find a boulangerie vending machine there, which was out of everything, which just compounded my misery that morning. Not that it was miserable, but on balance, it was it was
The silver lining had not appeared yet, exactly.
Yeah. But yeah, precisely. There was a lot of parts of the route which had that nostalgic element. There was some stretch of the road, even from that first trip in 2014. I remember this, and this comes back to having knowledge of the route as well, that I stopped in this town called Saints. I knew where the Carrefour was because I distinctly remember when I got there, it was Sunday afternoon, and I checked into a B&B and asked her if any supermarkets open. She was like, no, it's a Sunday afternoon. But there is this Carrefour which is open in the afternoon. So I remember having to wait till 3 p.m. to go there. So when I passed through this time, I knew exactly where it was. And it sort of brings back memories of that time. There was other moments. Brittany I quite enjoyed because I was familiar with a lot of places. I did this really nice event at the end of last year called L'été Breton, which one of my friends helped to organise, and I rode around with a friend during that as well. And yeah, it was just a really nice event to pass through places sort of in a different context. It gives you that element of having an idea where you are. It also adds to this feeling of making progress as well, that you're linking up these places from distinct parts of my memory, but linking them up together. And another place which I really enjoyed actually was riding around Normandy, because in sort of the mid 2015s I took a few trips over there, as it was easy to get to getting the ferry across from the UK. So there was plenty of places again that I'd stayed in before. Even remembering on a school trip we went to stay in Normandy as well. So I was sort of had my mind sort of, where am I in relationship to this? And yeah, elements like that where I was passing through places which potentially just looking at on a map or just purely cycling wouldn't have had that much interest. There was always something going through my mind to help put these in some sort of context. And again, that's what really, really attracted me to this whole route, that it was getting to see all these different parts of France. There's the familiar parts, and there was other areas which were very new to me as well. Yeah, being able to experience the country, feeling how distinct things changed throughout each region, but still having this overall cultural familiarity to me as well.
It's pretty stark. I remember that as well, having, done many rides around France now. Not all around France and not all in one go like you have, but you do see those distinct regional changes where you're in a different place, but there's still a cultural familiarity that's there as well. And there are different cultures within departments and regions as well, which, France is very proud of that, and their different terroir and their different cuisine in places as well. Something that we in the commentary team were quite happy to be updated on was your nutrition, which, to be honest with you, started out with how many, viennoiseries, how many croissants, almond croissants are you going to be devouring around France, but quickly turned into the croissants. I mean, you did devour them, but all of a sudden it became about ice creams, because you found yourself riding this in exceptional heat through the majority of the route bar a few days. And ice cream was the way that you were able to deal with that. Can you just let the listeners know, like, the record for number of ice creams in one day? What was it?
I think we were on about 19. But then
I remember 19. 19 ice creams, listeners. Can we just put that out there? Now, hang on. Did that include, like, I would call it an icy pole. I don't know what you call them. What do you call them?
Well, maybe like ice pops, but the only brand I was interested in was Calippos in that sense.
That's it, Calippos. Did your 19 include Calippos?
I think that was the question, wasn't it? Whether it was, I can't remember if it was 18 or 18 without or 19 without, but there was only a couple. I was mostly leaning towards ice creams, maybe a couple of Calippo chasers there.
Wow. And with your ice creams, because something else, and we should talk about nutrition a bit more seriously here as well, but something that did start happening for you, I can't remember, it may have been 5 or 6 days in, was your mouth was quite sore. So actually what you could physically eat and chew without pain became something you had to think about. And I think the ice cream sort of helped a little bit with that as well. Or do you feel the ice cream brought that on?
No, it's been a common occurrence with me that my mouth has been quite sensitive if I take on too many sugary items, and I think it may also be to do with acidic items as well. Because I can cope with it for a few days, and I've experienced this in other events as well. But then my tongue in particular becomes very sensitive, and I find it difficult to, it then becomes unpleasant to eat things that are, I don't think it's just overly sweet. I think it's more things which have got that acidic element. So even things as basic as, if I get like a pizza slice or something, the tomato on there will really react in my mouth. So I had to be really conscious. I mean, I could still take them on, but it just taken away a bit of the pleasure of eating them. And sort of after effects, it would make my mouth hurt a bit for a while. So I was, really trying to privilege things which were still, I could still take on sweet things, but more basics. I sort of joked it was more sort of anything brown was usually good. And creamy things which cooled down my mouth were often good. So that's where ice creams were good. Actually, chocolate was as well. It's got that sort of acidic element to it. That was off the cards.
Was like drinking yogurt something that you turned to?
Fairly often. Things like kefir as well. But I think the coolness of the ice cream seems to help as well. So there was a tactical element in this.
Coming to having so many as well, was that sort of like a serendipitous thing where at one stage I think you'd stopped at a supermarket and you can't just buy one ice cream, you have to buy a box of 6. And then did you realise, well, actually that box of 6 was pretty good, so if I just do that 3 times. I
think it's sort of another one of these things that's escalated that, at first I was sort of seeking out individual ones, but then, I distinctly remember there was an afternoon, one of the first really hot days when I was in the sort of Bordeaux region, and went into a superette, and all they had was a 6-pack, and I thought, this sounds like a bit much, but I'm gonna have to do this. Is this or nothing? And then once you've done it once, it seems to become acceptable. So it was only in small places that you could often get single ice creams in France. So I'd say I was really forced to get malt.
You were just budget conscious, really. You were value for money.
And it did get to that stage as well. When I had the option to get single ones, I thought if I'm going to get 2, it's going to cost €5, but I can get a pack of 6 for €4. So why?
I do that with croissants in my area because they have this deal where if you buy 3, you get 1 free. So you get 4 for the price of 3. And often if I'm buying any, I might be buying 2, 1 for me, 1 for my husband. I just think, well, 3 is only 1 extra, but then I get another one and then I can have 2 to stash away. Yeah. It does escalate quickly. Can I ask, because I know, we're speaking now, time has passed since you finished Touriste Roudière, and you did just recently take can I call it a mini tour? Because, you did ride the UK and back and with some transport in between, but have you found that you've needed to wean yourself off having 6 ice creams at once? Like, can you keep it to 2? Or
it's something I'm quite good at separating what I do in the bike to what I eat in normal day-to-day life. Like I just have 2 compartments for them. I know some people say they can't keep certain food in the house because they know they'll eat it, but I've got I can sort of see out of the corner of my eye, sort of like a under the cupboard bit just full of food I only eat in the bike, and I don't even think about eating it in day-to-day. So in that sense, normal life, I'm not going to go and buy a 6-pack of ice cream, but as soon as I sit on a bike and ride over 100 kilometres, then that instinct is kicking in straight away.
You've normalised it for yourself now, haven't you? There's no guilt there. Well, I remember once, Samuel, my husband and I, we were on a ride. I think it was actually when we did our Raid Pyrenees ride, and we were at a campsite, and I was on food duty at the supermarket, and I know he likes rice pudding. Mm-hmm. I detest this stuff. Don't ask me why, I just don't like it. And I remember I couldn't find him like a 2-pack. So I had to get him a 4-pack. And I remember he ate all 4 at the campsite. And his initial reaction was, no one should eat 4 of these in one go. But now he's normalised it. Actually, in that setting, it would be quite okay.
Yeah. And, in all seriousness, the amount of calories I was burning each day...
Oh, you were going nowhere near it, yeah.
Yeah, it was needed. You just can't replace what you are burning when you are riding 2/3 of the day, either from what you can physically take on or from what your body can process as well. I mean, even after all that, I looked at myself in the mirror afterwards and I could physically see that I'd lost weight during it.
One of the things, and we've touched on it, is the idea of preparation v planning, and the weather is an element that you cannot forecast. It's going to be, even with the best forecasting, you're not going to know what's going to do for 13 days. And all but a few days you had extreme heat to deal with. And that's where, I guess, you made the decision to stay in hotels for this.
Mm-hmm.
So you weren't bivvying, you were inside hotels. But something that you did do very early on to deal with the heat was you would ride super, super early, and I can't even call it the morning, can I? The times that you left some days. Was it like, oh, I'm getting up? We'd get your voice messages at like 9 or 10, or maybe 8, and like, yeah, I'm going to be leaving in 4.5 hours. I might be setting off at midnight or something. But then with the idea that you're not going to be continually riding in the heat of the day, because in France, when it's that hot, it's not like it gets to 5 p.m. and then magically it cools down. Actually, the hottest time of the day is often 6, and the temperatures will stay elevated for quite some time as well. Was that a strategy you've employed in other events, or was that something that you had just decided, okay, I need to change and adapt, and this is how I'm going to try it out here?
Yeah, it does. It depends to an extent on the nature of the event. I think this tactic definitely lends itself to longer events when you have the opportunity to establish a routine. A lot of it comes back to it's about how many hours during a 24-hour period you're riding. It doesn't matter how you split it up. There's only a certain amount. It's only 24 hours in a day that you can work with. So if you keep riding late into the night, that means the next day you're starting later. You've got to ride in late into the night again. It seems to be this common thought that you need to ride late into the night, otherwise you're slacking off. You can't stop early. But taking that view that as long as you're putting in the hours, it doesn't matter what time of day that happens. And that comes to the considerations of when is the optimal time to be riding, when to be resting, which is going to vary in different circumstances. For me here, my main considerations were I was sleeping indoors every night. So that meant making things as easy as possible to find either a hotel, or I used Airbnb sometime as well. Trying to check into a hotel in rural France at midnight is often quite difficult. So moving that forwards means you don't have to worry about arranging for keys to be left or so, and you can check in fairly normally. There's also at that time, supermarkets in France don't stay open super late either, 7 p.m, 8 p.m. usually. Yeah. I know there's other options for food as well, but I quite like to, if I'm stopping for the night, to be able to stock up for that night, for that next morning. So then, especially when I'm starting early in the morning, I'm sufficient for a long period of time. So I could do those two things at once if I'm not stopping super late. And then the temperature, the heat was a big part of it as well. By starting early in the morning, it meant I've got a large number of hours in before the heat at the coolest time of the day. Obviously, the coolest moment is just before the sun comes up. And I think it also helps that transition of, I know at this point there wasn't any particularly cold temperatures, but I think it helps if you're already riding when you're going into the coldest part of the night, rather than going out straight away to the coldest part and then having to warm up into it. The final part of this, I'm sure there's more, but what I can remember off the top of my head, is around that transition from day to night. That I love riding into the sunrise, and I think probably most people can relate how sort of boosting that is, sort of seeing the sun come up.
Super energizing.
Definitely.
Yeah.
The opposite, riding into the night, can be more difficult. I think I say fortunate, but part of the reason I wanted to do it in June was having maximal daylight conditions. But stopping earlier meant I didn't have to go through that transition from day to night. There was, I rode this around France and saw 2 sunsets, and that was on the first night and the last night. Every other night I was in bed before the sun had gone down. So it just shows you don't have to be riding deep into every night. It comes back to that sort of the whole sort of suffering and flogging yourself thing. That this was a tactic which I wanted to be sustainable and get into routine of it as well. it's another thing which I believe in a lot, and it's partly personal to me. I'm a creature of routine. Creature of habit, creature of routine. Once I get into that, then it becomes natural to me. So I wanted that to be the case here, and it definitely was. That if I kept switching my hours of sleep, if I rode more one day, I know that's going to compromise what I'm doing the next day. Equally, if I kept pushing back the time I was sleeping, I knew I'd have to make up for that sometime. So I did manage to find this nice equilibrium in the middle where it was it did fluctuate a bit depending on circumstances, but I was quite consistent in the times of day I was riding as well. Something
that's occurred to me is just in the way we've discussed things, and even looking chronologically back through the events that you have done, is there's moments where you've learnt big lessons and you've put the lessons you've learnt from that forward to the next thing that you do. I imagine that plays part of the process when you're actually coaching people, because this is something that you do now as well, isn't it? You coach as well, and you share learnings from this. How did you get into coaching, and how has your own personal experience informed how you coach people?
Yeah, in terms of how I got into coaching, I think it's as much, well, I suppose it comes into both aspects of it, that I really, really like that idea of being able to take the experiences I have, the learnings I've had, and be able to help facilitate other people with their own endeavours. And it felt like a sort of natural process over a number of years, that from speaking to people, giving people advice on certain aspects, and then taking quite an interest in that, more sort of into the performance and training side. When I looked more into this, there wasn't, and there still isn't, that much formal advice on how to go about these sort of things. Whether you are racing, whether you're doing things like Audex's randonnées, there's a lot of bro science out there. If you ask questions on forums and so on, people will tell you what they did, but haven't really got a reason to back that up. And a lot of the training advice comes from what traditional cycling disciplines do, which, and what I believe now, is the basic training principles. Yeah, these are always going to be the same. There's going to be some overlap there, but then actually applying that to what is a very unique discipline, both in terms of the physiological elements and all the other bits which go above and beyond that, the logistical, the self-management, nutrition side. That's all so distinct to this area that's what I found. It was a struggle for me to find that. So what I wanted to do is to equip myself with that basic knowledge of cycling coaching, but then look to apply that to what is unique about the ultra distance scene. And that's where what I like to offer is this understanding, this grounding in the scientific elements, and taking what there is out there in terms of research, because there is a growing amount, both just dedicated to ultra distance and extrapolating what there is, which isn't just specific to ultra distance, but elements of it which are important for what we do, and then adding that with the experience I have through doing events, through doing my own independent travel, but also recognizing that these experiences, they're individual to me. Everyone I coach and work with are individuals as well. So what works for me isn't necessarily going to work for others, but I think it can inform the way that I approach this. And I think that experience is a large part of this, especially as it is, in relative terms, quite a new discipline.
We should give a shout out. Like, if people are listening to you now and want to have some help from someone with a load of experience in this space, how can they find you online? How can they get into this a little bit more?
Well, the coaching business I run is called ACIER. That's ACIER, and the website is acier.cc. I tend to want to say that in French, in a French way, because it's the word for steel in French. And I used to live in Sheffield, which is a steel city. So I thought allying or forging the two together was a nice way.
Here I was, Samuel, thinking that it was like a nod to a good sturdy steel bike getting you across the distances. But
well, the steel bike, the bike en acier, was made in Sheffield as well. So it's a nice link there too.
There we go. Listeners, I'll put a link to that in the show notes and also to your Instagram account as well, which I believe it's Therese. Is it Therese.Routier?
That's correct. With an E on the end of touriste, yeah.
There is indeed. I will have links there. Click on those and you can get in touch with Sam as well. Before I wrap it up, I think it's a pretty important question. Coming into the finish, rolling back home into that finish line area there at Manosque, how did you feel on that day? And how do you feel about it now, reflecting back on it too?
It another one which easy to view, maybe gold tinted glasses this time, because it was, and I'm sure I don't think I'm exaggerating. I really sort of felt it at the moment because I was heading west during that final stretch. The sun was setting that evening, and I was back on familiar terrain. The area I live in is in Provence, and it's quite a distinct landscape, and it's something which I personally think is the most beautiful landscape there is. And just being back there in familiar surroundings with this sunset, which just made everything so golden. It was, I've just got this great image in my mind. And even the very last checkpoint was at this village called Tortor, which I thought was appropriate as well. I thought every tour needs a Tortor, and so that was there to finish. And it was a village which I've been through a couple of times before on my way towards Nice, which is where I was coming from, but I think it was in the winter both times, and it was just a really quiet little village. It's one of the les plus beaux villages de France. So,
I love that. I want to make a cycling route which just takes those in. That could be my own little Therese Routier.
And I think it's about 8:30 in the evening, and this place, it was a bit too hot in the afternoon, but it cooled down by then. And it was just the atmosphere. There was about 4 or 5 restaurants that had sprung up in this village, all on this square. There were just people out enjoying this evening, just such a convivial atmosphere. I was a bit annoyed because the first restaurant I went in wouldn't give me a stamp, so I had to go to another one. So yeah, maybe that wasted 2 minutes. But apart from that, that just gave me this really nice vibe to then carry on towards the end. From then on, I knew the roads. I knew where I was at, which sometimes that can play in your mind when you know there's 60 kilometers left. But in the grand scheme of things, I knew sort of there it was going to happen. And then there was this final hill, which I've done many times before, which then you get to the top and have a view over the town. You can see the lights, and just from there, I sort of knew, I knew I'd done it. I knew even if I had to walk the rest, I could get there in time. So I think that was that point which I stopped for a couple of minutes, took a photo, and then went down. Sort of felt like I was a bit on autopilot coming back home from there.
And does it feel real reflecting back? Like, obviously, you did it. You've got every bit of proof. You've got your brevet there, your official world record setter. Does it feel real?
It's one which because it was such a big thing to get my head around, that sort of trying to envisage it all in one single thought, in one single idea is quite difficult. I think and there's so many things which happen along the way, which, I mean, take hours to go through them, but such positive memories that come from it. I think it's such a positive overall experience, and it's difficult to beforehand to envisage how I'm going to feel about it afterwards. In some ways, you sort of think, my whole life's going to change, But I think it's also important to recognise, sort of to be grounded afterwards as well. Like, yeah, it was an amazing thing to do, but at some point I've got to get back to doing things which I need. Well, I don't want to. It's not as if I'm sort of loath to get back to day-to-day life, because I really enjoy what I'm doing, but at some point, yeah, you've got to resume what is normal life afterwards. Sorry, it's not a great answer to that question, but in a way, I'm still processing what happened, and in a way, I sort of ask myself, what next? But the difficult thing about that is that the whole route, the whole concept meant so much to me that I'm sort of in a moment where I struggle to find something which has such resonance in terms of the roots, the whole France aspect, that bit around having that achievable target to go for. So yeah, in a way, I'm not hurrying myself to find something to try and replicate it, replace it, because I know I won't be able to. In some way, I've been quite interested there've been some accounts that I've been reading of people who've done this route in the 1970s, which is a whole other issue of how remarkable it is they were doing this without GPS guiding them.
The bikes they were using and equipment they used.
Yeah, but what was interesting there was a bit of a sort of a to and fro battle going on between a few people who trying to set the best time. And so that the best time from 1978 had stood until 2011, which was when Christophe Alliger rode in just over 13 days. So I wouldn't be averse to a few other people setting out there still, and maybe that would, if someone betters my time, maybe that would give me motivation to go back, because it's something which could interest me to do it again at some point. I don't think that's going to be next year or the year after, but if someone knocks off a couple of hours from what I did, then maybe I'll have to go back out there.
Yeah, or I mean, maybe you do it in reverse. Maybe you see what it's like going the other direction.
Well, maybe, but I think the way I did it in the mountains, it turned out I was mostly going downhill on the drags. So I think doing it that way, maybe it all evens out, but yeah, it could be a consideration to do it the other way. It will all seem new that way then.
I should know the answer to this question, and I probably did at one point in time, but I don't now. Was there a final croissant tally? Like, was there a final pastry tally for this?
Well, I was hoping my commentary team would keep tabs of this.
No, we lost tabs of that because you kept flooding us with ice cream.
I think we're probably looking at 3 or 4 days. So may actually. Well, there was a couple of days where I did a couple of supermarket ones in there, and I think I regretted those ones.
Do they count? I'm not sure. Yeah, no, not sure. I must say, one of my high points was knowing that you had stopped in Etretat at the same boulangerie I had been a few months earlier, and we both reached the same conclusion that the croissants from there are the absolute bomb. Mm. Buttery, flaky, beautiful. I know you had rain and you couldn't enjoy it in a perfect setting, but 10 out of... Well, do I ever give a croissant a 10? I'm not sure. Got, very, very, very close.
You've always got to leave scope for improvement.
You do. All right, Sam, it's time to wrap the show up. I could talk to you for ages because we certainly didn't go into every detail of every day, but I love that we've got a pretty good roundup of you as an ultra rider, as someone who's also a nod to the enjoyment of actually travelling by bike as well, and how you've melded the two together. You are now a guest of Seek Travel Ride. You get to choose a song that goes on the Seek Travel Ride music playlist. That playlist, one song chosen by every guest to be the soundtrack to their adventures. What song are you going to pick for you and this Touriste Routier challenge?
There's a real backstory behind this. It's a really abstract one, so I'm not sure if anyone would have heard of it, but I'll choose Dollar William by Hue and Cry.
I certainly don't know it.
Briefly explain why. Basically, my mum had the cassette of this. I think it was one of her favourites from back in the 80s, and used to play it in the car when she used to drive me to school when I was in primary school. So I've always got like a nostalgic element to this. And it ended up being, it was the last thing that I listened to before I started, because it's the sort of thing I listen to rarely, but like on special occasions.
Oh, it's like your special song.
Well, the whole album is. So, but it was this song in particular. Yeah, it was one of the ones I listened to in the morning, and it just kept going through my mind, like the chorus. Yeah, just especially in the Alps. It was like 2 weeks later after I listened to it, it just kept going through my mind. It's like the same refrain.
That's hilarious, because one thing I remember is I asked you, do you ever listen to music? Like, how do you keep your mood up? And your answer was never with music, always with food, because you didn't listen to music here. So, but I love that this song somehow became an earworm for you along the way anyway.
That's fine, because I didn't listen to anything, so it was the last thing I listened to, just stayed in my mind. And then a point afterwards, like, well, when I finished the ride sort of coming into Manosque, I thought I'd thought about this a few days beforehand on the road, like how I'm gonna feel. And for some reason I thought I'm probably gonna cry while I sort of seen the town sign or anything. But I was very stoical about it when I got there, and it sort of felt like I was an autopilot for that last bit. And even like that evening, I think like I didn't feel massively emotional. And then the next morning I sort of had a relaxed morning, had a couple of croissants and so on. And then I put on this album, and as soon as I heard the songs, I just started crying, but it was such a cathartic outpour, and I just I remember sort of like sitting down in my kitchen for like 10 minutes. I just couldn't stop crying, but it just felt so good to get out. And yeah,
there we go.
Maybe it was all the emotion came out then, because like afterwards, like I don't feel as emotional sort of thinking back to it now, but actually seeing family recently and talking about it did sort of bring it back a bit. But yeah, I quite like sort of having that emotional element to it too. So
it's definitely your song, and it's now on the playlist. Listeners, you can check it out on Spotify or Apple Music. I've got links to it in the show notes. I'm going to play it as soon as I finish this, just so I can see see the quirky special song.
Yeah, it's sort of a classic 80s type song. I don't know. I think it's the sort of thing. If I didn't have an emotional connection to it, I don't think I'd sort of think much of it. But yeah, I'd be interested to hear if
the thoughts.
If you think it's catchy at all.
I'll put myself in that element and put my Sam hat on and put myself in that place. All right, second last question. You got a choice to make one day, Sam. You can go left and you will be riding on the most corrugated washboard road in the world. There are no ends in sight to the bumps on this road. They will shake you around like no tomorrow. There is no smooth traces. Or you can go right, but you are going to be riding into the biggest dirty headwind of your life, and there's no let up there either. Which one are you going to choose?
I thought you were going to ask the uphill or headwind one. That's easy.
No. Uphill had to get ditched because everyone chooses the climb, and rightly so.
Well, I'll say headwinds, but for good reason, because if I was on corrugated road, I couldn't possibly hold my ice cream at the same time. So I think in order to facilitate my ice cream intake, I would choose a headwind.
Oh, I love that it's come back to ice cream. You know what, though? A question I thought I could use, which would bring the hill back, was, would you rather go uphill, would it be uphill, forever uphill, into a
headwind?
uphill with a tailwind, or downhill in a headwind?
What, uphill in a tailwind?
It would be uphill with a tailwind, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that's easy.
A non-real existing tailwind, though, right? Because tailwinds, on a hot day, tailwinds on an uphill do not help.
Yeah.
You actually would prefer a hot wind, even if it feels like a blow dryer on an uphill circuit. Whereas, the downhill with a dirty headwind where you have to pedal when you shouldn't, that's mentally, that mentally takes a toll as well.
Yeah. I had this in the Alps, but I'm sure I got a headwind up the climbs as well. There was coming down the Izoard.
It's always a headwind in the valley, coming down the valleys.
Yes.
Definitely here in the Pyrenees, you get a headwind in the valleys, and it's just like, ah.
Yeah, coming down these sort of 1 or 2% when you got roaring hot headwinds.
And you got to pedal, and go up the gears and actually put effort in. Yeah, you feel robbed. All right. Final question for you, Sam. I'm going to be really keen to hear your answer to this one. I just want you to finish this sentence for me, and that is, the best thing about taking a bike adventure is?
Croissants?
Yeah, definitely, right? Never-ending supply. Oh, I love it. I just come back to food once again.
Well, I think there's a whole cultural element in that as well. So I'm not talking about food. I'm talking about the whole experience of it as well.
Yeah, although can I just say something I have observed here in France is in Australia you would go for a ride with mates. And you would always joke that the best part of the ride is actually the whole reason for the ride is the stop at the bakery at the end or the cafe at the end. I've observed here in France that's not a real big deal. People don't sort of have the post-ride stop or the mid-ride pause.
We should introduce that, the pause croissant.
Yeah, exactly. What are you doing? I guess they're just used to it, aren't they? They probably see us having them and go, what are you ordering a croissant for now? It's not breakfast.
Yeah.
And how are you going to dip it in your non-existent coffee? All jokes aside, Samuel Thompson, it has been an absolute pleasure. It's been absolutely awesome to dig into your story again. Having discovered this was going on for you, I had the awesome pleasure of being a teeny tiny little part of it when it was happening as well, meeting you there on the road, and to be able to hear your full story, get a better picture in my mind of you and how it led you to drawing up this challenge, to finishing it off as well. But something I really love is, as I mentioned during the show, with each and every sort of challenge you've set yourself or ride or tour or whatever, you've sort of learnt things and applied them going forward, and that's awesome as well. I came across a quote which you sort of hinted at when we were talking about the end there, and it was all about you sort of reaching that end point there in Manosque, and you had said, I was heading west towards the setting sun in the most beautiful light, got to the top of the climb, I had a clear view, the moon was hovering above, I just took a couple of minutes there, soaking it all in. I think you're well within your right to take more than a couple of minutes. Take a couple of years if you like. Soak it all in. You don't need another thing to start planning towards. This was a big part of your life. You can be damn proud of doing it. Take it all in. Take stock. And more importantly, thank you so much for sharing your stories and experiences here on the podcast at Seek Travel Ride.
Thanks, Bella. Maybe I'll put that round the world record attempt on ice for a couple of years then.
Yeah, that's the way. There we go, listeners. What did you think about Sam's massive ride and effort there on the Touriste Routière? I absolutely love it as a concept, and I don't joke. I can see myself embracing the idea of doing my own little personal bike tour on this route or something of the sort. What I really liked there were the nuggets of wisdom that kept coming out from Sam. The idea of preparation over making big plans. I've said it in many episodes before, the idea of packing a good dose of flexibility in you whenever you go on any type of bike adventure, whether it's a planned route, an ultra cycle race, or a bike packing multi-nighter. Flexibility is king because we don't have control of everything, and having to be rigid and set in a structure can often take the fun and enjoyment away from these things too. The other big one for me was that word of gratitude, and acknowledging that when we're doing these challenges, and again, whether it's an ultra cycle race or your own multi-day, multi-week, could be a multi-year cycle tour, there are tough moments on the road, but always reminding ourselves how privileged we are to actually be doing that thing, to just be cycling, and that's all we have to think about, riding our bike somewhere, we're having an adventure. It can be hard physically, but the idea that we have to suffer through things, I think that's a misnomer as well, and it's something that Sam is all about embracing, and is the gratitude and the joy that comes with the bike travel side of these crazy challenges that he takes for himself. I absolutely really enjoyed those bits of wisdom from him, and I hope that he does just pause and take stock and take a big dose of pride to what he's done as well. Now, listeners, if you are enjoying the interviews here that I'm putting out as episodes on Seek Travel Ride and you'd like to show some appreciation, you can do so by buying me a virtual coffee. Head to buymeacoffee.com/Seek Travel Ride. Buy me a few virtual coffees, but more importantly, let me know what is it that you love about the podcast and where is your next bike adventure going to take you. And until the next episode, I'm Bella Malloy. Thanks for listening.